Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken?
Hey, Kiernan.
Boy, you get to Europe. It sounds like your wireless is just limping along here. I don't know. We don't have the freshness of Ryan Davis here.
You got me because I didn't want to tell you this, but I left my mic at the Airbnb.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Are you going to get it back?
Yeah, it's just at the Airbnb. I forgot to bring it.
Are you in the office?
I'm in WeWork. Yeah.
All right. I feel like we've jumped already into the Judy alert, but it's not time for that. First, welcome. Hello, Ryan. It's nice to chat with you, even though the audio, I don't know, it's a little garbly, very unprofessional, but that won't surprise most of our listeners. However, they'll be relieved because the meat of today's episode, it's not going to rely on your mic at all because we have a standout interview.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. We're getting to delve into, one of you and I's like favorite events of the year is the publication of the 52 places. And
exactly, the 52 places to visit from the New York Times. And in years past, we've had the travel editor, Amy, come on. And those are great, fun interviews to hear a little behind the scenes. But this year, we got the actual editor who was in charge of the 52 places. So he goes even a little deeper and gives, there was one question that Amy has dodged in past years, which is what was left on the cutting room floor. And he gives us a little peek into number 53.
Oh,
yeah, pretty good.
It's a fun list this year. I was going through it, to put together my picks, and pretty eclectic. Fun list.
Absolutely. They did a great job. So Stephen Hiltner will be joining us in the main body of the episode. But first, Ryan, I mentioned, I teased a little bit that you're in Europe, but we didn't dive in. So for Judy, which is Ryan's mom, who never knows where he is because Ryan's not great at staying in touch. I know you saw your mom recently and then you just headed right to the airport, didn't tell her where you were going. And so, Ryan, where are you?
Well, I was home in Ocean City, Maryland for like 72 hours.
We have a great episode on that. I hope you listened in preparation.
But now I'm in Berlin, Germany, here at the WeWork. And it's I flew in yesterday morning. So yesterday was just kind of getting adjusted. And, today was my first day working this sort of like new schedule where I have off until like 3:00 in the afternoon. And then I work like from 3 to 11. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, but that gives you great time to go do a tourist thing each day.
Yes. So yesterday I went ahead and I basically made my plans for my entire rest of Berlin, where I'm doing like a big thing every day, which will be exciting. And
you've been to Berlin once before, I think?
I've been to Berlin twice. In 2007 and in 2009. I had to look this up. So it's been a really long time since I've been in Berlin. And it's funny, Kiernan, like I'm walking around and somebody will say something to me and I'll respond like in Spanish, which doesn't make any sense for Berlin, but also I don't really speak Spanish.
Sure.
But it's just like I'm so like
even in Mexico, you shouldn't be doing that because of how bad your Spanish is.
English is much closer to German.
That's very
Spanish.
funny.
Yeah. So today,
also, everyone there speaks English.
Exactly. I was today. I was at a cat cafe, and the guy's like, "What table are you?" And I'm like, "Cinco."
Oh my god.
I'm like, "Sorry, 5."
They're probably thinking you're one of the Nazi war criminals that escaped to South America, returning home
and came back. Yeah,
that's kind of dated, I guess. You're not that old.
No, I'm a little young for that.
Now, let me ask. I'm interested to know what kind of Ozempic planning you need to do, because now, did you load up before you went to Europe, or do you get a European version? Like, do you have in your doc kit right now? Do you have a South American version, an American version, and a European version?
Well, Ozempic is European. It's from Denmark.
Oh, yes, that's true. Thank you. Yeah.
No, I traveled. I brought 3 vials with me, 3 pens, as they call them. You've got to like keep it cold. So I've got a little cold container.
Oh
I travel
my God.
with.
I didn't know that. You have to keep it cold. So are you traveling with like a freezer pack full of Ozempic?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they make these things for folks who have, diabetes to carry their insulin. So yeah, it's like a standard. Yeah. So I've got a little kit.
That's insane.
Yeah.
It makes me, I mean, in Germany, had a lot of heavy food there. So you're going to really struggle. You're going to buy one sausage, have a week worth of food.
I have to say, last night I got a doner kebab on my way home, and it was so good. They're really known for their doner kebabs here.
Oh yeah.
So, but I'm excited to eat, and I mean, it's interesting. I haven't been to Europe since probably a year or two before the pandemic. I mean, I would have gone.
Yeah, same.
So it is interesting to be here, and I wonder if I've made my travels too hectic.
I don't think so. You tend to plant for like a week or two.
Yeah, I'm planning for like a week.
A week. That's a week while you're also working is tight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for Berlin, it's like one thing because it's like a huge, crazy city. So you can never really see it all. But like, I think for some of the smaller cities, I'm going to at least have more time to like see a bulk of stuff. But it's interesting. I'm excited. I feel the energy. I was walking around all day. I hung out with some cats at a cat cafe. I started
By the way, your mic is doing an excellent job of picking up all the office noise around you. We're very anxious to hear the dispatches from Berlin. It's going to start with the next episode. We're going to talk about the museums of Berlin. And, Germany is one of the ones that Catherine and I have kind of cordoned off as a good place to go with the family, like our kids when they're a little bit older. So I'm hoping to get some family friendly tips from you. I know you love to frequent places children are.
I mean, I think, gosh, I don't know that I would say it's necessarily a family place, but sure. I mean, you're not going to take them to the.
Listen, I want to go. Frankly, I want to go look at the castles and explore the Black Forest, and we'll land in Berlin and do the museum. So the next episode will be for me.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to give too much away, but the next episode is going to be all about the museums of Berlin. So I'm excited.
We can give it away. It's all right. It's good. It's good to tell people what we're going to say on the next episode. It makes them come back. Yes. Now, Ryan. Now, I assume with all the plane time you've had, then you've managed to dig in a little bit on the 52 places, and we're not going to have time to do a full recap here because the interview is pretty meaty. But I am curious, and you're going to hear my picks in the interview. But were there any places, one or two, that stood out to you and just sort of whetted your interest?
Yes. So there's two places that I'm going already. Amsterdam and Bulgaria.
Oh, you're going to Bulgaria? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm going to Bulgaria. So
interesting. Now, what made you choose that prior to seeing it on the 52 places list?
I don't have like a good reason outside of the fact that I just haven't been there.
Yeah, yet. I think that's a great reason.
Yeah, so I was glad to see it on the list. I'm like, oh, okay, it'll have some research to do. But so those two I'm excited about. I've been to Amsterdam a couple times in my life. Again, not for like 15 years. But I'm going to go to the Anne Frank house and I'm going to do some more stuff that I haven't done there before, which I'm excited about. But another thing made the list that I've been thinking about a lot, and that's Magdalena River in Colombia. And, this is sort of like the Mississippi River is to the US. It's the main river. It's an artery. It was super important in like early, in the early history of Colombia as a nation, for how they, both in like, for shipping, but also for moving people. I've never like been to the river. And they've just started offering these sort of like fancy boat tours that are like multiple nights. And I have to say, since I'm going to be in Colombia so long, I'm going to make a real effort to do this year. And it was the 52 places that I was like, I gotta get it together.
I mean, that sounds terrific. And, those like fancier river cruises, that's something that we looked into doing when Catherine and I went to Peru. And they can be a little bit pricey, but they bring you to places that would be impossible to see otherwise. There's just no way to get there over land.
Yeah, exactly. So super excited about that. And then one other thing I'll give an honorable mention to is They called out specifically a little town in Peru. Did you see that? Aletantambo.
Oh yes, yeah. Actually, we visited. Catherine and I went there when we were in Peru. Did you go?
Yeah, I did. It's, you often visit it on the way to Machu Picchu.
Exactly.
But
yes.
I was glad to see it get a shout out because I think it, as a little town, it's super cool.
Agreed.
It's got an incredible archaeological site that is really only rivaled by Machu Picchu. That's certainly worth seeing.
And so much less sceney and less a production than going to Machu Picchu.
And I've been out there twice, and my only regret is that I haven't actually spent a night there because it's got such a cool backpack. Like it almost feels like you're at the bottom of a mountain.
Yes,
one of those, because everybody's like going to Machu Picchu and it's like a real energy and So it's super fun little town. It's beautiful. So I was glad to see that get a shout out, especially because it's like often overshadowed by Machu Picchu. So great list. So much to do, so much to explore. And, there's just infinite stuff I want to do.
I would say the best thing. I mean, this is the best part about it is it gets you. It actually kind of captures what you were describing with Bulgaria, which is it puts on your map a lot of places that you may not have heard of before. I thought this year's list particularly stood out, and Stephen talks about this a bit. They're trying to focus, we've talked about over tourism quite a lot, and they're trying to put in increasingly, they're trying to be mindful of putting in the second places or the third places to see in a country where they think tourism should thrive, but they're just not on the map. And particularly this list is very rich in regards to Japan this year for a couple of places that I was completely unfamiliar with. And I've been to Tokyo, but not outside of Tokyo. And man, I mean, I'm just convinced that Japan needs like 6 months to really explore all its places.
I'm super jealous. My buddy, acquaintance at the pod, Chase Whiteside, is doing a month in Japan.
Oh man, year. Really? Just for pure fun, or
just for pure tourism?
Oh,
we taking a 1 month sabbatical.
His previous interview was such a crowd favorite that maybe we should consider having him back.
He's coming back to talk about part 2 of Chile. So
I was being sarcastic. Well, we'll have to talk about that off air. Well, for now, to go to a great interview, let's talk to the 52 places to go in 2025 New York Times editor, Stephen Hiltner.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
Our guest today is Stephen Hiltner. He's an editor, writer, and photographer for the travel section of the New York Times. But most importantly, for the interview today, this is the man behind the 52 places to go in 2025. This is 52 places. That release date is marked on my calendar year round, Stephen. So I'm thrilled to dig into the process in this year's list. Thanks so much for coming on Out of Office.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I do want to say at the outset, there is a whole army of people who works to pull this list together every year, so I can't quite claim credit for it. But
the man behind was too grand.
Yeah.
Well, let's start there. Why don't you tell us what your role is and what the extent of that team is? I am curious, especially, do you have a global network that's keeping an eye out year round for what the next year's 52 places is going to be?
So the short answer is yes, we really do. And it is our network of contributors, both staff writers, reporters, foreign correspondents, both within the US, all over the world, and also, this incredible list of freelance writers and photographers that we work with, who are also based all over the world. And of course, within the office, we also have a team of people on the travel desk, a whole group of editors, probably around 8 or 9 people on the travel desk who work on this project, as well as a whole team of other people at the Times, from the designers, the people who are sort of building the web, the site, what the page looks like, to the people doing the promotion, to the social editors who are working on the Instagram and social media copy and the presentation. There really is a whole sort of team of people behind this project. But it is the writer photographer network all over the world that pick everything off with their recommendations.
And what role do you play in that team? Are you sort of the center of that wheel?
There are a handful of editors on the travel desk who are sort of at the center of that wheel. I'm sort of managing the project for the last couple of years, and coming up with schedules and keeping everybody on track and everything. But what we do is fairly early on. I mean, this is a project that takes 4 or 5 months to pull together. In late August or early September, Amy will send out an email to this large network of writers and photographers, probably several hundred people in total. And what we ask them is, tell us the places that we should be excited about in 2025. And, ultimately what we're looking for are super compelling travel destinations, but in particular, we're looking for places that have really great reasons to travel in 2025 in particular. So that might mean that there's a major museum opening up. It might mean that there is a huge festival, a celebration of some kind, a major anniversary. It might mean that there is a new airport that's allowing a new kind of accessibility. But we're really looking for that sort of news hook, which is why should people go there this year in particular?
And you mentioned Amy. That's Amy Vership, the travel editor of the Times, who's come on occasionally to Out of Office to talk about the list. One thing Amy's mentioned is often themes start to emerge as you look across the hundreds of destinations you're considering for inclusion on the list. Were there any themes that emerged this year particularly strongly?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think there are years where we really lean into the idea of having themes. I think in 2022, for example, we were really focused on destinations where travelers could make a difference. I think in recent years in general, and this year in particular, I would maybe point to a couple themes, which would be the idea of over tourism, which has been a major problem in some places around the world. So we've thought a lot about um, how can we recommend places that can help mitigate that in certain situations, or how can we recommend places that can sort of spread the sort of travelers out among a broader region in a particular country? One place in particular where we think about that is Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And we have two places from Japan this year. We had two places from Japan last year. And what we really got into the habit of doing there is we have a really great writer, photographer that we work with there named Craig Maud, who knows places in Japan that are really sort of off the map for conventional travelers. And we've gotten in the habit of recommending some of these places as a way of saying, like, if you go to Japan, there are places to go to beyond Tokyo and Kyoto. And you might consider some of these smaller cities or some of these areas where most people don't get to. And part of that is an acknowledgement and a response to the fact that Japan has had a huge influx of travelers in a handful of cities and is itself trying to navigate this issue of over tourism.
Yeah, another destination that jumps out in my mind for that in this year's list is the Delphi Grecian destination, where they're opening up a new Highlands trail to hike. And when you think travel to Greece, I think most go right to Athens and the islands, and this is an entirely new culture that it seems really rather undiscovered.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's another great example to point to on this list. That sort of Athens and island itinerary was, again, one of the things we're thinking about, encouraging people to think beyond. And in that case, there's this new 500-mile hiking route under development called the Pindus Trail. It's not complete yet, but parts of it are being completed now. And we recommend the southern terminus, which is this coastal city of Delphi, as a great place to visit, not just to kind of kick off a hiking trek if you're interested. This trail sort of runs from the coast all the way up to the border with Albania. But also there are some interesting archaeological sites there, obviously, and it's a compelling place in its own right. But absolutely right. It's a great example of helping direct people to a place where they might find fewer crowds, where it might help alleviate some of the pressures in some of these really heavily touristed areas.
I think maybe the place I was most excited to see on the list, because I've just been waiting for this to appear, was Greenland. Because obviously Iceland's been having basically a decade of tourism spotlights and has been greatly visited and is now starting to put in place a lot of the over tourism restrictions. And it always seemed to me, well, gosh, if you're on the way to Iceland and you're going straight over Greenland, I bet Greenland has a lot of the same attractions. And I loved the write-up, found it really compelling both for the on-season and off-season travel, where you can get the same beautiful nature, northern light exposure, and of course have those long days and long nights, depending on when you're going, that you can experience in Iceland.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd have to check this, but I think this is the fourth time that Greenland has been on the list. So it's not entirely a newcomer. But
was it always the whole country, or was it a specific destination?
I think it was always the whole country. Yeah, and I could take a quick look. Yeah, it looks like it was on the list in 2022, in 2020, and in 2015. So it's a place that we've recommended this year. In particular, they have this there's sort of nonstop flights from Newark Liberty Airport that make it a little bit easier to get to. And there's also this new international airport in Nuuk, the capital. So that is expected to make easier for a lot of people to get there, to see the country. Greenland has been in the news recently.
Yeah,
we
right.
were sort of looking at this as a travel destination before all of that.
I was going to ask. I was curious about
and
I had a feeling.
That itself is sort of one of the interesting components of pulling this list together, which is that because we begin preparing in August and September, and because we're covering so many different places around the world, inevitably there are places that we have under consideration that we either have to reconsider because maybe there's a major geopolitical event, maybe there's a major hurricane or some other natural disaster. Things can sort of happen over the span of those several months that we're working on this that require us to be a little bit flexible and to always have a few backups in hand in case something gets knocked off at the last minute.
And with Greenland, I had been thinking how there were probably some more eyes on it in the past couple of years because Conan O'Brien and his travel show visited Greenland. And you also featured what you described as White Lotus Thailand, which is, of course, Thailand getting renewed attention because of the popularity of the TV show White Lotus.
Yeah, so that new season is airing, I think, in February. And what we've seen in the past is that previous seasons of the show, which is obviously hugely popular, have really kicked off like a lot of tourism interest in the place where they're located. So Thailand has really ambitious tourism goals. I think they're trying to attract 40 million international tourists in 2025. And this part of the country, Koh Samui, I was there maybe 15 years ago. It's definitely on people's lists, but it's not, the first choice for a lot of people. I think is probably fair to say. And, we expect because of the popularity of the show that it's going to draw more travelers to this particular island and really a set of islands in the Gulf of Thailand.
And not to jump too quickly from pop culture to classics, but the top spot, which I know that the list is not formally a ranking, but I have to think you put in special thought for what's going to be featured first, was Jane Austen's England, because there's an important anniversary this year. So how did you decide on that for number one?
Yeah, I think there are some years where a really obvious choice jumps out at us. I think in recent years we had London as the top choice because of the coronation of the king. This year, there was some debate among the team. I think we settled on Jane Austen's England, which we're all super excited about because it is the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth. This is sort of a part of the country in the southwest of England where she was born and where she lived and wrote. And there are a lot of festivals and celebrations in honor of her legacy, life and legacy there. It also is sort of the kind of travel destination that speaks to our values at the New York Times and travel journalism in particular. It's not just a beautiful place. It's not just a place with really rich history. It's also a place that has this really interesting sort of intellectual tie to a hugely important person in the English literary tradition. So it's got all these layers of interest that can draw lots of people there, and it really spoke to us. I mean, it also is just a stunning location. The photo at the top, which is this is because it's the number one destination, and it sort of appears at the top of the page. It is a really stunning photograph that we just couldn't stop staring at, frankly, and that definitely contributed to its having been chosen as the number one destination.
Well, and when it came to 250th anniversaries, Lexington and Concord also made it on the list because we're coming up to the 250th anniversary of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, and I'm Boston based, so this is super familiar to me. But you were even putting on my radar some special celebrations and art openings that were coming in celebration of that anniversary, and then soon next year the 250th anniversary of the signing of Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, this is a really fun item because I think the 250th anniversary in 2026 will be obviously a huge event in the country. This is sort of almost like a precursor to that, which we were really, really intrigued by. And we found really fun. There's like a quilt show, really colorful musical concerts. They're planting 250 trees. There are all of these sort of colonial themed events that, sound quite charming. And we think will be a fun place for people to be.
Our listeners will know that Ryan, who's a consummate New Yorker, is always giving me a hard time about Boston, and something tells me that featuring the quilt show might not be the most dynamic one for me to argue. We are a hot place to visit. But on the New York front, you also have a bunch of new museums. It seems like mostly reopening after major renovations.
Yeah, so in New York, we featured New York museums as the actual item. I think there are 4 major museum reopenings. One is this really huge refurbishment at the Frick, which is returning after this 5-year refurbishment, and it is really going to sort of open up a whole new world there. People are really excited about that museum in particular. There's also a wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art that has been overhauled. The new museum is opening up a major extension. And then I think we also highlighted the Studio Museum in Harlem, which has been closed since 2018. They are reopening in a brand new building. So, there's this huge, there aren't many cities in the world where 4 major museum events are taking place this year, and we thought that was really worth highlighting.
Was that largely because of COVID closures, museums taking advantage of the fact that they couldn't have visitors, and so they shut down and sped up capital projects, or do you think it's just happenstance?
I think that at least some of these major projects were started before COVID. So I don't know offhand how much was directly related to COVID, but I do know that some of these projects were sort of planned and conceived and kicked off before COVID. But that may have influenced like the degree to which they did some of these refurbishments. I really don't know.
What put it in mind was the entry that you have on Asheville, North Carolina, definitely makes a lot of it's really the city reopening after recovering from Hurricane Helene, and some of the art installations and a lot of the restaurants and new openings where people are kind of back up on their feet.
Yeah, this was another really interesting case of we were pitched this by one of our writers before the hurricane. And we loved the item. We sort of put it into the yes pile. The hurricane hit. We took it out of the yes pile, sort of expecting that it wasn't going to be a place that was going to be welcoming to tourists, or that maybe they wouldn't want a bunch of people coming. But actually what we heard from locals and from a lot of businesses there and a lot of the organizations that we spoke with was that they are now ready for travelers, and they are in search of people to come to visit, to spend their time there, to try the restaurants, to visit some of these museums that are opening. and they really encouraged travelers. So that was a good example of a place that went sort of in and out of the yes pile, and ultimately we settled on including it, which I think was the right choice, and I think people are excited both by the prospect of visiting, and locals there are excited by the prospect of drawing some visitors.
And are there any other that stand out as a favorite of yours for this year, or that maybe there was a debate over, does this make the cut? Does this not make the cut? And what kind of pushed it over the edge?
That's a good example. I'm sorry, that's a good question. Let me think for a second. I think one of the other places that I was excited about was Toyama, Japan. This is sort of the place that I referenced earlier in the conversation.
And by the way, another one
city...
that falls into that category for me of new discoveries, places that really were not on my radar.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the place that I mentioned, recommended by this journalist that we work with there, Craig Maud. It is not the place that most people would think of visiting. It's sort of thought of as a gateway to the Noto Peninsula. And again, that was a place, the Noto Peninsula was really devastated by an earthquake in 2024 and is sort of still recovering. But this city, which is sort of southwest of that peninsula, has this really interesting collection of sort of cultural events and locations that might draw people. There is a really stunning glass art museum, which also contains a beautiful public library that was designed by Kengo Kuma. And we saw images of it and we're just sort of blown away by the architecture. So that really drew us in. There's also a really beautiful lantern festival and a whole slew of interesting restaurants and culinary delights. So again, that place sort of caught our attention because it was a destination in Japan that might draw you to a different part of the country and get you away from some of the crowds.
One reason I look forward to the list every year is there's always a couple of destinations that are truly off my radar, places I've never heard of, I've never seen written up anywhere else. And one that stood out to me this year was in Kenya. I believe it's pronounced Kilifi. And so is that how did that come to you, and why did that make the cut this year?
So that one was recommended by Declan Walsh, who is our chief Africa correspondent based in Nairobi. I don't know exactly how he first discovered it, but he sent us this recommendation of this little beachside town that offers really an interesting, colorful experience in that it's not a place where you go for a huge, fancy resort. It is a kind of beach town that it's in the early stages of drawing tourists. And what happened, I think, was during the pandemic, a lot of digital nomads and people from the capital sort of shuffled over to the coast and found this really sort of chill coastal area, empty beaches. There is a thriving international school that has attracted sort of people with young children. And it's the kind of place where you go where you're not going to see a ton of tourists and you'll get to experience a place sort of in the early stages of its development as a travel destination.
So I always think when you're this close to a project, there's got to be some heated disagreement, or when you're getting towards numbers 50, 51, and there's only one slot left. So a place that you really wanted on the list. So was there anything left on the cutting room floor this year, or is there a place that you're personally planning on going in 2025 that you'd also like to put the spotlight on?
Yeah, so one of the interesting places that I'll mention that didn't make the cut was this place, Merritt Island, Florida. And the reason we had it on there was because it was supposed to be the place where Artemis 2, the US's first manned mission to the moon since 1972, was scheduled to launch there from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. And so we were super excited to include this place. It was sort of a good example to get a little bit of science onto the list, which we love to do. I think in the last year or two, we included Geneva, Switzerland, because right outside CERN had opened up this new visitor center that was really interesting, sort of from a science perspective. We were super excited about this place. Who doesn't love to go see a major space launch? Of course, that launch got pushed back to 2026, so we lost our news peg, and it didn't quite make the cut. But that one was tough to lose. That one, we were excited about having a space related event on the list this year.
Well, something tells me that there will be more of those to come. And I wouldn't be surprised if a hotel in space soon becomes top of the list. I know there's a lot of companies working on that as the next step in space tourism.
Yeah, and actually, I think that we had so one of the other projects we did this year. This is the 20th anniversary of the first time we did a recommendation of places to go. So the first project, Places to Go project, was in 2005. And one of the things we did this year, in addition to publishing the new list, is we did a separate article that was really a kind of a look back at the last 20 years of travel.
Mm-hmm.
And more specifically, we looked at the ways that travel had changed in the last 20 years and the ways that was sort of reflected and influenced by the list. And it was so fascinating because you think back 20 years, I mean, the world itself has changed so much. In 2005, there was no Instagram, there was no Twitter, there was no Airbnb. Facebook had just launched the previous year, but there really was no such thing as a social media influencer. And all of these things have transformed not just the way that we travel and the places that we travel to, but the way that we plan our travel and the way that we share our travel, the way that we experience our travel. So we spent a lot of time this year sort of looking back over all the lists. Interestingly, space did make the list in 2012. I think we highlighted one of these plans to send people up into space for like $200,000 or something at the time, which ended up taking quite a bit longer than was anticipated at the time. But space itself actually was on the list in 2012.
Man, I didn't know what a historian of the list you would be. I love that. That might be good fodder for a follow-up interview.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I mean, if anybody else is interested in it, there is a separate article. There's 52 places to go in 2025, and then we did a separate article, 20 years of the places to go list. So if you're interested in sort of in the history, how the list has changed, how it's evolved, and how the world of travel itself has evolved, you might want to check out that article as well.
I've always liked the tidbits too when the Times acknowledges, we put it on the list, we thought this thing was going to happen, then funding fell through and it didn't happen, or it didn't happen until 3 years later.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully that's not true of anything on the list this year. But yeah. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. And we will, of course, link to 52 places to go in 2025 in the show notes.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to chat with you.
And now it's time for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan. Well, we're here on the last stop. Thank you very much to Stephen Hiltner and the New York Times. They're always so excited about travel in the year ahead. And but this is a time, Ryan, where we put aside those day-to-day concerns, because this is the last stop. It's the final segment of the show. It's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment. It's popularly known as the people segment. And that's because it's sort of a place for sharing and peace. It's where we bring a piece of ourselves. It could be anything, but it has to meet one criterion. It has to inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So, Ryan, I mean, knowing that you are freshly landed in Berlin, I have to believe that you brought a last stop this week.
I did bring a last stop this week, Kiernan. I get a bunch of email newsletters. I get one called Interesting Facts that occasionally has interesting facts, but sometimes
feels like that should be the name of it. Occasionally interesting facts.
Yes. But there was a fun one yesterday all about how Paris has these new water fountains that dispense sparkling water.
Oh, man, that is like the most French thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah. And I don't know that folks know, but I'm a sparkling water obsessive. Like I drink sparkling water for every meal all day long. I'm just like,
you got to watch that for the tooth enamel. That's not good for the enamel.
Blah blah. What you can't do. You can't do everything, Kieran.
You can't do everything, Kiernan.
I was excited to read that, and I think it's fun that you get to go to these places that have really fresh drinking water, and you hit an extra button and you get some CO2 injected to make it sparkle. But it reminded me of the only other time that I've been to a city that had public fountains with sparkling water, and that is Saratoga Springs, New York. And in Congress Park, their big central park there, designed by Olmsted, of course, up there in Saratoga Springs.
Hold on, let me genuflect and do the sign of the cross anytime you evoke his name.
You can actually get the fresh spring water there, and that is fresh. That is naturally sparkling, and it's very minerally But they, it's like the town's fresh water. So, yeah, it's super cool. I need to get back to Paris maybe next year and try the sparkling water fountain. But also just go up Saratoga Springs, not too far. Cool little town. You can get your sparkling water from the fountain there too. So that's my last stop this week, Kiernan. Did you bring one?
Well, I just want to make a comment before we move on to me, which is I will say that this is an experiment that they are doing with this carbonated public water fountain. And my prediction is that it will fail. And here's why, because I work in the restaurant business and I know keeping up the CO2 canisters to keep these lines clean and keep that water bubbly, it is a major lift. It's costly. CO2 has been becoming increasingly expensive. It's hard to keep carbonated beverages flowing. And,
why is CO2 getting increasingly expensive?
I'm not in the CO2 industry. I'm just in the price hikes on the other side. But I'm just going to say, I think this is unsustainable. I think that this is classic socialist overreach. I'm trying to give the public their carbonated water. I'm good with just straight, fresh, good old American clear water. And, soon we're going to be taking the fluoride out. We're shutting down the Department of Education. We're cost cutting everywhere. Here, the French are just buying endless CO2. I mean, we're going in different directions, folks.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to work out. The French are going to figure out how to keep that CO2 flowing.
Remember how we were potentially going to do a politics podcast instead of a travel podcast? I feel like that was a little bit of what that could have been like. And maybe the next step in the out of office media empire is a political travel show where I take on, cities that are overdoing it like this. That's not a bad idea.
There are so many travel true crime shows now. It's like 6 of them.
I mean, I know, because I stopped listening to that National Park Predators.
Yeah, that was a bad one. Now
especially she was calling it National Park Predators. There was like 2 murders in national parks. Then she was like doing these obscure state forests. It's like, I don't think this counts. I don't think this is true to the title here. All right. Well, yes, I did. I actually brought 2 last stops this week, Ryan.
That's too many.
Well, the first one's a teaser for something upcoming. It tells you something I'm going to embark on. So the first is I'm just packing right now. Tomorrow we leave for a ski vacation to Stowe, Vermont, and I was just thinking about we often say that the last stop can be gear, and we don't talk about too much gear. Though I would be interested in hearing more about your little Ozempic freezer there for a future last stop. So maybe next episode that could be yours. But I've come to realize, my God, I have become such a finicky sleeper in middle age that now I travel with a white noise machine and an eye mask. I don't know if you are you someone who can just like totally just conk out, fall asleep anywhere you are?
I'm an amazing sleeper.
See that I'm so jealous of that because I'm exactly the opposite. And I have found these white noise machines. I mean, at this point, the family travels with like 2 or 3 of them every trip because the kids need them. I need them. And it's called ROHM, ROHM sound machine. Very simple, very small. I'm just going to give you a little sense of. Sorry, I just nodded off there for a second, but that's exactly what I need to put me out. I need the eye mask, and I really wish that I was like you, but knowing that I'm not, I'm very thankful for gear like this, and we'll definitely be putting it on my pack list because if I end up there without it, there actually is a cool little hack in the iPhone where you can turn on something very similar from your phone, which is like background noise, but it's kind of buried in the settings. I think I might have spotlighted it on a previous episode.
Yeah, I could barely hear that, so maybe it'll be stronger in the edit.
Oh, I wonder if maybe my professional mic drew it out. In which case, we'll have to put it back in post. Please, we're not going to put it back in post, folks.
Just tell Archie to just add white noise.
Archie, here. Good shout out for Archie. Hi, Archie. Yeah. Archie is our audio editor here, who's been with us. God, I mean, probably 5 years now, 6 years, right?
He edited the very first podcast.
Wow. Now, the other last stop that I have here, which is a little bit of a teaser, typically I'd put it up stop as a quest for Rick Steves, but I do just want to flag, he's got a new book out that I'm planning to dig in on very soon. And I'm hoping I'm going to use it for the hook to get him back for episode 200 of Out of Office. So his new book is called On the Hippie Trail, and it's a collection of his journal entries from a trip he took in 1978 from Istanbul to Kathmandu. And his Instagram's been full of all these great old photos of him with big hippie hair and beard. And he's, thin as a whippet. And it's really very funny to see, very different from his kind of like American dad phase. But you can see, the roots of his kind of pot enthusiasm and also his acceptance of the world at large. I mean, he really was a very hippie dude. So on the hippie trail, I'm gonna dig in. I'll definitely be talking about it on the show, and then fingers crossed, gonna reach out to those people at Rick Steves and see if he might be interested in coming on.
Yeah, it would be great to have Rick back on. Gosh, I love the idea of the hippie trail. That sounds like a really fun book.
I think it's going to be great. I will say this is not I like the dad Europe focused Rick Steves, but you may recall I asked him, why he didn't move into travel guides about other places in the world, because I came to realize how well traveled he is in places that are outside of Europe. But that's what's interesting about his company is he's focused on helping Americans on the stepping stone to broader travel. And he feels that Europe is that accessible place that most Americans want to take their first set of trips, which I think is really insightful. Yeah,
a lot of Americans, we grow up kind of learning about our ancestry, and that is often European. So, like, I know as a kid, Europe always seemed like where I would go when I traveled. Obviously, now I've traveled to different places, but Europe does
often European. Man, you are sounding out of touch, my friend. Hey, you haven't been in America very much lately, but we got a real melting pot here, my friend.
I didn't mean that at all. I meant that certainly.
You meant that you're of European descent. We know what you meant. Yes. I mean, again, you're trying to straddle that line and appeal to both sides of the aisle, and I know which side you're appealing to with that comment.
It's tough, folks.
Well, Ryan, luckily, I think we're going to be doing our part in helping with that stepping stone to Europe with your next episode, all about the museums of Berlin. So now for today, we're hearing you before. So can you just tease a little bit? What museums do we have coming up?
Yeah, Berlin has an incredible amount of museums. So I've picked, a handful mixing historic and art museums. So I'm really excited. Obviously the history here is really interesting, but also known for its art scene. So I'm going to cover all the museums I'm going to go to this week, plus a couple that I've been to in the past, and excited to talk about it.
It's going to be super interesting. I will be very anxious to hear, because it will be a planner for my future trip to Berlin. But until then.
I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken? I know, I messed you up with that until then. I don't usually until then.
I know.
But you know what? You're usually on a better microphone. So today is a different sort of day.